Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. In this episode, we'll be chatting with Mark Cameron, CEO and Director of Alyve, that's spelled A-L-Y-V-E. Mark authored a really interesting article titled The Future of Work, How AI is Reshaping Jobs, Organizations, and Workforce Dynamics, which I found to be super insightful. So we'll be talking through some of the ideas that he brought up in his article, and I'm sure we'll be delving into other things as well, because I often take tangents. So Mark, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm super glad you're here. So Mark, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So as you said, I'm CEO and a Director of Alyve. We're a management consultancy specializing in technology, strategy, and adoption. Of course, a lot of that's really focused on AI at the moment, and then we're sort of helping organizations understand what that means and where the pitfalls may be, and how it may start to shift and change the way that they think about their business and its organization. But when people ask me what I do, I say it's complicated because I do that. I sit on several boards, so a couple of not-for-profit boards. I'm invested in AI startups and a range of other startups. I sit on a few boards around venture capital. I teach digital transformation and AI transformation at a university here in Australia as part of the executive MBA program. And generally, I occasionally sleep. So yeah.
I was just thinking about that. I'm not sure when you schedule that in there, but it sounds like you have a very full plate.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Well, I'm super glad you're here. And like I said, that the article, after I read it, the word the human mind is dense. There's so much really good information in this article, which I'll leave a link to in the show notes for the folks who are watching or listening to this. Because it's really worthwhile going through. Again, it's a longer read, but there's a boatload of information and a really good perspectives that I kind of want to touch on a little bit today because they were so good. So the first one, your article emphasizes that AI is reshaping work rather than eliminating it. So from humans, but assume that your employees' job roles are going to have to change with AI. How do you envision these organizations balancing the technological efficiency piece with preserving the human purpose as those roles evolve?
Look, I think part of the reason I wrote was built that article. So a combination of writing and working with different AI tools and so on to get it was initially I was just interested myself, both in the work that I do and some of the roles that I sit with in the not-for-profit sector. And what became really clear looking at, as I was going through that process and also reading a bunch of other research. So research has come out from Stanford and Harvard and MIT over the last probably 6 or 7 months, is there seems to be two camps when it comes to AI adoption and what it means for the workplace. I think the first camp is very much seeing it as a cost reduction tool, and they're applying it. They're looking, very focused on individual use cases. So it's really kind of like the way that they've bought and used and thought about technology previously. They're just that same pattern is happening, and what they're seeing often is that they're getting improvements, but not across the board, but in individual processes. And sometimes those improvements aren't as great as they were expecting. The other camp is seeing it much less as a tech upgrade and much more as a culture upgrade. And I think they're the ones, and there's quite a few of them now, but they're the ones that are saying, look, we don't really know what this means, but we need to help our whole workforce think about what an AI-enabled workplace and workforce is going to look like and feel like. We need to help upskill everybody. And we know that the majority of the use cases probably aren't going to be top down, they're going to be bottom up. And what they're finding is that with that mindset shift, that support across the organization, they're the ones that are getting those reported really big shifts in productivity across the board. And often their workforce isn't shrinking, it's growing. So, and then you're also seeing a whole bunch of those other sort of softer metrics like, sort of job satisfaction and collaboration and all those sort of things also starting to improve. So I think, I think Yeah, I mean, it's this particular technology, in my view, fundamentally leaders are asking their teams to actually rethink the way they work, and in some cases even rethink the nature of work. So to me, that's inherently cultural. It's not a technology discussion, first and foremost. It's the technology that happens, sort of later on.
How do organizations approach that? Because to me, here, looking at it from sort of a balanced view, I would look at this and say, golly, it's a lot easier for me to buy a technology and slap it in for this one work aspect. I can put a real direct line to. Connect the dots. I say, oh yeah, that technology will help me perfectly with this one thing. And you're right, you're going to get benefit from it. How do you get that mindset to shift from an organizational standpoint to say, like, I'm not going to look at this as technology, but I'm looking at it as culture? Because in my mind, changing culture can be quite difficult and much longer term.
It can be, but it's I think, so if you think about it as a cultural, I mean, as a full-on organizational transformation, so cultural shift over the long term, yes, it is a long journey. But I think the developing the mindset, an AI mindset across the organization, that can be a much shorter journey. And there's, supporting your people to be able to understand how AI works. What that means. So if your organization starts to develop an AI mindset and starts to think about where to use AI effectively, where humans and AI can work together really effectively, and where humans are just best, doing things independently, and suddenly get a very clear view of what that means, naturally, your use cases and the use case identification is going to be much higher quality. I think what's happening at the moment in some organizations or some areas of business is that they're looking at AI through the same lens that they looked through, previous automation ways, basically. And because that's their frame of reference, every use case they're identifying is essentially just an automation one. Now, automation is really, really valuable, but automation and that's also supporting the augmentation side of it. So AI and people working together is going to produce much, much greater outcomes. So I think, in my view, it's not just how do you get everybody using the tools, but how do you prepare your organization to ingest AI capability, both at a technology and at a human perspective, at scale.
Right. That makes sense. And so this kind of leads to my next question, which really relates to the people that could be impacted. We talked through this and you highlight the risk of AI potentially magnifying inequalities, especially for clerical tasks, which often fall within a woman's role versus a man's role. And I'd hate to be sexist that way, but these are things that are just statistically the way they are. What kind of steps can organizations take to ensure that deploying the AI is inclusive and responsible as you get going?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to that, but so you're absolutely right. There are some inequalities baked into it. There's baked into it from the data perspective. As we know, there's some bias that's baked into the models, and the frontier models have been doing a lot to address that. But then there's also the tasks or the roles that could be impacted, and some of those maybe a sort of there's an overrepresentation of females there. I think. That's why, again, thinking about it as a culture upgrade, as a, how are we working, I think is a really important thing, because it then becomes much more of a co-design process, as opposed to a top-down use case, push it through the organization and then just deal with the impact. I think it's, again, rather than looking for the one or two silver bullets that are going to change the way the organization works, we're actually going to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bottom-up use cases. Let's co-design with our people to make sure that everybody's benefiting in some shape or form. That's where you're going to get it. Also, want to also talk to people about what the biases may be and where those inequalities may emerge, and be upfront about that, and then help your people sort of work a way around it. I think, in the end, I think with AI and leadership more broadly, it's less about designing and managing every single aspect, and it's a lot more about how do you provide the vision and the capability and the support to allow the organization to address the problems as they emerge.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and it kind of touches on something I want to get into, which is the leadership mindset to get them there. Because you mentioned earlier, applying technology seems to be a mindset that it's easy to take on. Hey, this is another automation type of technology we can apply to this use case. How do you change the mindset at a leader perspective, which then leads to that culture change, which eventually will allow you to work differently?
Well, I find, so I spend a lot of time talking with leaders, so both at governance levels and executive levels around AI. And I try very quickly to work out whether or not I need to go philosophical or self-interest. So the philosophical approach is much more talking about the sustainability and how you build how you set your organization up to be able to take advantage of this technology and be able to not only compete but win in this environment. And that's really sort of talking about if you're just thinking about it as doing the same stuff that you've always done but faster and cheaper, there's not really much sustainability in that. And that's really just efficiency kind of focus. But if you then start to reframe it as what more could you do with, if you could add 20-30% capacity to the organization, what would that allow you to do? What are the things that you would love to do from a strategic standpoint that you've never been able to afford to do before? Then let's create that capacity and allow your business to do that. So free people up to focus more externally. The other point around that from a philosophical standpoint is if you can free people up from doing a lot of the internal compliance, sort of like, administrative work, and they're freed up to look externally, so work collaboratively and spend more time looking out into the market about where can I have an impact. That allows you to connect every person to the organization's strategy and a mission in a way that you've never been able to do before. So that's one side of it, and that usually works very well. The other side of it is just the self-interest and go, well, look, let's just look at the data that's coming from the market. And as you said, it's probably a bit too early to have best practice, but there's definitely some patterns emerging. And that one of those patterns are, focusing too early on individual use cases is producing only small improvements. If you're able to enable much more of the organization to take advantage of this technology, then you get those, 20, 30, 40% productivity improvements across the board. That's going to result in much bigger bonuses. So, just,
now you're talking. So kind of on the same line, you're talking about the philosophical or the self-interest perspective. Do you see larger organizations adopting this more easily, mid-sized organizations, smaller? Who's hearing this message of the cultural change and really taking it to heart?
It's interesting. So I think there's been a lot of waves and shifts. I think some of the very, very large organizations, like global organizations, moved early, and they moved very, very aggressively on the cost reduction side of it. They're now actually starting to go, hang on, we need to rethink what we're doing. And they're sort of winding that back and now starting to go, okay, we need to actually think about this much more as a cultural shift. And because they're seeing the resistance internally, a lot of the predicted benefits they were going to get just weren't there. And part of that's because, the workforce is rejecting or just not complying and so on. So they're going, well, we have to do the change management aspect of it, as well as the skills uplift aspect of it. I think mid-sized organizations have had, while they can't invest as heavily in technology up front, sometimes they've been able to look and see what's been going on. So often with mid-sized organizations, there is a culture which is much more intrinsically human focused so sometimes, not always, but sometimes they're the ones that are starting to focus much more on what this means for our people and the way that we work more broadly, as opposed to just the mechanics of it.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So, part of your article, you cited the World Economic Forum, 2030 future of jobs kind of thing. And, a lot of that focuses on reskilling and,
Yep.
how do we reskill these folks, et cetera. So we've made this decision at the highest levels. Leadership is bought in. They want to change the culture. And you have people who say, that sounds great. I have no idea about AI. So how do these organizations start designing a reskilling program to help close some of those skill gaps and maybe get the employees more engaged for that long-term viewpoint that the organization is looking at?
Yeah, I have a sort of three-phased approach that I like to talk about there. And it follows these steps. So mindset, skill set, tool set, in that order. So the first and foremost, it's what are the, sort of run workshops, run forums and so on to help as many people as possible develop a mindset around AI. And what that's trying to do is separate it out from previous technologies. Don't think about it as a replacement for Google. Don't think about it as a replacement for Word or Excel. This is more of a companion than a word processor, for example. Also, help them understand the different techniques you can use to be able to get the most out of it. Then moving into the skill set side of it, so that can become a little bit more specific to roles or functions. But what are the core ways of working with AI that's really important? How might that change the nature of your work? Might change the nature of your job, and then things like prompting, like being iterative, for example. Even now, we had ChatGPT 5 launched today, and it's already seemed like this skill is going to be focused much less on prompting and much more on managing AI assistants, or AI, sort of agents. So, what are those skills? And that skill set piece can be somewhat technology agnostic, I think. It's really sort of core inherent skills that people can think about and develop that are going to help them be incredibly useful no matter what tool set that they happen to be working with. And the thing about that is those capabilities and those skills are actually inherently human skills. So collaboration, leadership, creativity, etc. Thinking about how you identify where you as an individual add value, have unique elements about you, and then start to focus on those and build build that muscle memory up, as opposed to just trying to do the sort of the rote stuff. And then finally, tool set. So then it's then how do you take that mindset and that skill set and apply it to the technology of choice of your organization, and start to identify where additional technology investments would start to be valuable for the organization. And essentially what we're doing there is try and empower everybody to look for use cases to drive value inside the organization. If you've got a good way of capturing that, cataloging that, and putting it on a benefits realization framework, it can have an enormous impact across the organization.
I imagine it could. So that kind of leads into another kind of branch of that discussion, which is, okay, we've got our people, and they've traditionally been in this role or that role in this organization division as part of the entire organization as a whole. Do you see, and I guess the answer is yes, how do you see these traditional hierarchical business structures that we have internally being challenged or changing as we see AI capabilities now become more diffuse into everyone's role and the way that they approach work? Because I imagine things are going to change, maybe not right away, but how do you see this changing maybe in the next 10 years as we start evolving at what an organization looks like?
So there's so much to unpack in that. I know I've been having this kind of conversation a lot recently, a lot with business leaders here in Australia. So first of all, I'll say, sort of right off the bat, if we're working with AI and it's starting to allow you to focus more externally, starting to focus more on the impact you can have in the organization, we've got tools that will allow you to, within the space of a couple of hours, develop a proof of concept that you can then show to other people. So all of a sudden, everybody in the organization, all of a sudden can develop ideas and be able to work with them. That's incredibly powerful. That's going to change, obviously, how leadership works. It's going to change the structure of teams. We also look at the research coming out, and it shows that organizations flatten quite quickly when that's available. So, people are able to be more effective individually, then also collaborate more effectively, but need less sort of management and project management. So that can start to change the shape of the organization. But I think if we sort of start to look a little bit further out, as you said, I think I'm not sure about what the answer, but I like thinking about the questions. And I think some of the questions that I like to work with is, what does the shape of your organization look like? As I said, this is the type of questions I'm asking business leaders here. So what does the shape of your organization look like when your carbon-based workforce, being your people, is outnumbered by your silicon-based workforce about 10 to 1? Okay, so what does that look like? How does that change the way you work? What are the core skills? Because to me, that says the core skills of every single person, that everybody's going to need to have a management skill, because they need to be able to manage teams of AI agents to be able to produce outcomes. Mm-hmm. Now that's super interesting. I think the other point around it is, what are the KPIs that you need to design within inside the organization? So as we know, KPIs drive behavior. And if your KPIs are completely focused on efficiency, what could happen is that you have all your people focusing on just doing a task and moving on to the next thing as quickly as possible, without actually necessarily deeply understanding the topic that they're working on. And so you aggregate that over a couple of years and all your people, and what you'll find is you'll have a business that is producing lots and lots of content that nobody understands. And because nobody understands it, the quality will drop off, because they aren't asking insightful questions, they're just asking very shallow questions. And so by definition, what could be happening is that your organization is becoming efficiently irrelevant.
Right.
And so I think that's, one possibility. I think the one other, I suppose the counter to that would be, how do you then design how do you deal with that? And I think designing KPIs that are more focused on impact rather than efficiency. So, and we're creating space for people to use AI to learn the topic, because as we know, AI can be an incredible teacher, and it can help you explore things from lots of different directions. So have we created space where people can learn the topic, understand it, explore it from lots of different directions, and then when they finally get to the point of working with the AI tool to produce an outcome, their quality of question and thought is going to be much higher. So while that might feel like the business is going slower, because of the quality outcome, it'll start to speed up dramatically, and you'll find that you'll get much greater outcomes. So I think there's just that balance. The one other question or thought that I like to work with people is saying, let's think a little bit in the future. So it's 3 years, 4 years in the future. You're out there, you're looking for a new manager role, for example, or a new sort of senior lead, a leadership role that could become an executive over time. And you've looked through a particular candidate's profile, CV, they've had an amazing career, they've produced incredible results. And then they sit down in front of them and they say, okay, you've had a great career. We want you to do the same kind of stuff for our organization. The person then says, okay, well, I can do that, but you can't just onboard me. You have to onboard my team of AI agents that I've been working with for the last few years, because it's not just me and my technology, we have co-evolved. Mm-hmm. And so if you give me a new set of tools, I will not be able to produce the same outcomes. So there's a from that, there's a shape of organization that's cultural and technical that we've got to think about. All of a sudden, we're talking about BYO agents into organizations.
Which brings up a really good point. And this is one of those things that I think is still kind of evolving right now, because when you think about if I'm inhabiting a role in one organization and I inhabit a different role in a different organization, I am bringing myself and my skills to that role that's been shaped there. The technology I use may be left behind here, maybe the same technology, but now I'm in a different instance or something else like along those lines, going from Microsoft 365 in this company to Microsoft 365 in this company. Same technology, just different instances. Will we see that though, where I wouldn't say vendor lock-in, because that seems like a really bad thing, but where you say, I've got my 10 or 100 AI agents that I've been working with for the past 4 years that have made me extremely productive, that either A, I can't take with me because now that's part of the IP of the organization I'm leaving, or I can, but I have to be on that same platform to move over here. Whether or not you are or not is kind of irrelevant, because this is what you're getting, my skills plus all of the AI capabilities that I've trained and helped manage and resolve. How do we approach that?
Yeah, it's super interesting question. I've been thinking about this for many years. In fact, I remember writing a few papers for some organizations in the US, probably about 15 years ago, talking about that very thing. And my perspective is, I think, so there's, so Brazil is starting to look at how does its population separate out the data it creates from the tool set that creates it. They're starting to think through, what does the bank of data look like for all of our citizens? And I think potentially decoupling in some shape or form the data that you create, so your profile and knowledge is able to be moved between different AI models and tools, I think could be part of the solution. I think we'll probably find that hardware, the sort of hardware providers start to develop elements of that as well. So so parts of that exist on your laptop or your phone and so on. So just like we went through the phase of BYOD and then working out how that fits inside the organization, that we might be sort of looking at that same kind of ecosystem as well.
Okay.
It's a super interesting question, because if you end up at the point where, I mean, potentially this is the best case for blockchain that we've ever seen before, but if we end up with where a lot of our data is decoupled from the tools, and we essentially have a global bank of data, that creates a whole new market category. Probably, I can't even imagine what the value would be, but I can imagine it would be astronomical. And our desire to be able to use increasingly smart digital assistants may be the thing that brings that into life. Of course, there's a lot of economic forces that would, sort of try and, as you say, sort of create a lock-in model. It's nobody really knows, but you can see lots of different possibilities sort of emerging before us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So last question is sort of, if you're looking into your magical crystal ball, which of course you have in Australia that I don't have here in the United States.
Yeah.
Looking into your crystal ball, what do you see in the next 12 to 18 months? Because we used to ask for 5 years, but like 12 to 18 months now seems like it's 10 decades, right? So what do you see in the next 12 to 18 months as we see the developments of these AI agents and AI in general going forward?
I think, particularly in the corporate world, I think the adoption of AI agents will likely speed up quite significantly. I think the way that AI is built into the way that organizations operate will start to evolve very, very significantly. Yeah, so we'll probably see like whole sectors of the economy start to be reinvented in some shape or form, and those sectors of the economy probably are the ones where there's lots of fragmentation, And sort of data standards are hard to get. So, so things like healthcare, education, agriculture to a certain degree, accounting, those kinds of things where there is a lot of modernization happening, but it's reasonably slow. And I think that probably a combination of technology and capital will then start to drive consolidation in those areas, and the AI will be at the core of what that looks like. And I think those sectors could be dramatically reshaped. It's already starting to happen in some shape or form. I've noticed that the sort of the AI focused roll up model is actually being driven more by venture capital than private equity at the moment, which is starting to tell us something, I think.
That's very interesting. Well, like I said, I know the world is changing, and AI is certainly on everyone's mind, no matter what sector they're in. So it'll be very interesting to see as we go over the next, like I said, 12 to 18 months. Lots is going to change for sure. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. And for everybody listening, I will leave a link to this article. You will want to read the whole thing. It's very, very interesting. So thanks again, Mark.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was really, really good to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.